In the wild 1800s, a lonely cowboy defied the law to save the last Apache woman being sold like cattle, and found love where hatred ruled. If stories of courage and forbidden love touch your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Let's get started. The wind carried the smell of dust and gun oil through the small Arizona town of Tucson. It was 1886, and the borderlands were restless. Whispers of war, hunger, and betrayal drifted across the dry plains. Luke Harper tied his weary horse outside the trading post, his boots scraping the hard ground. He had come only for supplies, salt, bullets, and maybe a drink. But what he found that day wasn't listed on any trader's shelf. A crowd had gathered by the old barn, voices sharp with cruel excitement, the kind that always meant trouble in the frontier. Luke pushed through the men, his hat pulled low against the sun. In the center stood a wooden platform. Upon it, a young woman, her hands tied, her face streaked with dirt and dignity. "Last one left," the trader barked. "Full-blood Apache, strong and quiet. $10 for her, or she goes to the mines." The crowd murmured, some laughing, some turning away. But she stood still, her dark eyes burning with something fierce. Not fear, not despair, but fire. Luke felt his stomach twist. He'd seen that look before, years ago on the battlefield, when men refused to beg even as death closed in. Luke took a slow breath, his fingers brushing the worn leather of his gun belt. The trader spat tobacco and laughed. "No takers. She's half dead anyway." The woman's gaze flicked toward Luke, a single second of eye contact that froze the world around him. He saw not a stranger, but a soul refusing to break. And in that instant, Luke made his choice. "How much?" Luke asked, his voice even. The trader smirked, sizing him up, the dust, the scars, the quiet in his eyes. $10, he said, "and she's yours. Don't expect her to thank you, cowboy. She bites." The men around laughed. Luke reached into his coat, pulled out a small gold coin, and tossed it at the trader's feet. "Unbind her," he said simply. The laughter died. The trader hesitated, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. She's all yours." He sliced the rope and the woman stumbled forward, swaying in the heat. Luke caught her before she fell. Her wrists were raw, her lips cracked, her body trembling from exhaustion. "Easy," he murmured, steadying her. She looked up at him, wary, proud, unbroken. "Why?" she whispered. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Because I've seen enough chains for one lifetime." He led her to his horse, helping her mount gently. The onlookers muttered as he rode away, dust rising behind him like ghosts of the past. They rode in silence for hours, the sun dipping low behind the red cliffs. Luke didn't know her name, didn't know what fate had dragged her there. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her to die like an animal. As dusk settled, he stopped near a dry creek bed and started a small fire. The woman sat apart, her back straight, her eyes never leaving him. "You can eat," he said quietly, offering her bread and water. She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands, whispering something he couldn't understand. When the night wind came, Luke spread his coat over her shoulders and leaned against a rock, staring at the stars. He had fought in the war, buried his brothers, and wandered the West with nothing but ghosts for company. But tonight felt different, fragile, uncertain, alive. He glanced at her again. She was staring into the flames, whispering softly in her language, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Luke didn't ask. He just listened to the fire crackle and wondered if saving one life could make up for the many he'd taken. By morning, she woke before him, standing barefoot in the sand, her hair loose and wild in the rising light. "What's your name?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time, then said, "Naya." The word felt like wind through his chest. Brief, quiet, and gone before he could hold it. "Luke," he said in return. She nodded once. "You could have left me." He smiled faintly. "Didn't seem right." Naya tilted her head, studying him. "You are not like the others," he shrugged. "Just a man trying to sleep at night." As they packed their things, Luke noticed faint smoke trails in the distance. Riders, maybe soldiers, maybe worse. "We should move," he said. Naya didn't argue. They rode through the endless desert, silent but side by side. He watched her posture, proud even in pain, her eyes scanning every horizon. Once he saw her flinch at the sight of a hawk's shadow. Whoever she had been before, she'd lost everything. And yet, she carried herself as though she still owned the wind. Luke respected that more than he could say. By sunset, they reached an abandoned mining cabin. Luke built a fire, patched a hole in the roof, and cooked beans in an old pan. Naya sat by the doorway, humming softly, a song low and mournful, like the cry of the desert itself. "What does it mean?" he asked. She looked at him and said quietly, "It is for the dead." He nodded, the firelight flickering across his tired face. "You got anyone left?" Her eyes glistened. "No one." After a pause, she looked at him. "And you?" Luke exhaled. "No one either." They shared that silence, the kind only people who've lost too much can understand. The storm broke that night, rain pounding against the roof, lightning lighting the canyon like ghosts dancing across the sky. Luke stirred, hearing her cry out in her sleep. He moved closer, gently placing a blanket over her shoulders. She flinched, then whispered something, his name perhaps, though it sounded like wind. When she woke, she didn't thank him. She didn't have to. Trust, like dawn, doesn't rush in the west. It rises slow and quiet. The next day they rode farther into the wilds, away from the roads and traders. Naya began to speak more, pointing out desert herbs, signs of rain, places where water hid beneath the stones. Luke listened, realizing she knew this land better than any map ever could. Once she stopped and touched a cactus flower blooming from dry earth. "See," she said softly, "even death can grow something beautiful." Luke smiled. "Maybe that's what you are." She frowned. "What?" "Something beautiful in a place meant for dying." She didn't answer, but her silence spoke more than words. That night, under a pale moon, Luke sat sharpening his knife while Naya stared at the fire. "You will leave soon?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated. "You want me to?" She looked away. "I don't know," he sighed. "I don't belong anywhere, Naya. Haven't for a long time." She studied his face in the flickering light, the scars, the eyes that carried too much sorrow. "Maybe that is why the wind brought you here," she said. Luke looked at her, and for the first time in years he felt seen, not as a drifter or a killer, but as a man. The following morning he saddled the horse ready to move again. Naya approached, holding out his canteen. "You go where the sun dies," she said softly. "But I will follow the light," Luke nodded. "Then I reckon we'll meet somewhere in between." She smiled faintly, the first time he'd seen her do so. As they rode side by side, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Luke didn't know what tomorrow held. Bounty riders, danger, or peace. But as long as she was beside him, he no longer rode alone. And though neither said it aloud, they both knew. In a world full of dust and cruelty, something sacred had taken root between them, something neither chains nor war could ever destroy. Weeks turned to months, and the Arizona desert softened beneath spring's warmth. Luke and Naya settled near an abandoned canyon where wild horses roamed free and water pooled after rain. The land was harsh but honest, like them. He built a small shelter with his bear. Hands, and she filled it with quiet life, baskets woven from yucca, clay pots drying under the sun. At night, she told him stories of the spirits, of rivers that sang and stars that remembered names. Luke listened like a man learning to pray again, though he hadn't spoken to God since the war. One morning, as dawn broke red across the sky, Luke found Naya by the creek, her hands buried in the soil. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. "Planting," she said. "For food. For tomorrow." Her voice carried a calm strength that silenced questions. He knelt beside her, helping dig with his calloused hands. The earth smelled like promise. She looked at him then, really looked, and said, "You're not what they said white men were." Luke met her gaze. "And you're not what they said Apache were." Between them, something ancient passed, something truer than words, but peace in the frontier never lasted long. One afternoon, distant gunfire echoed from the canyon ridge. Naya stiffened instantly. Luke grabbed his rifle and moved to the doorway. "Stay inside," he warned. She ignored him, standing tall beside him as two riders appeared over the ridge, bounty hunters, rough and hungry for coin. "That's her," one of them spat. "The trader said she's worth 50 alive." Luke's heart pounded. "She's under my protection," he said coldly. The man sneered. "Then you'll die with her." The rifles raised. The desert held its breath. The first shot cracked the silence like thunder. Luke dove behind a boulder, returning fire. Dust exploded around them, bullets whistling through the air. Naya crawled low, grabbing his spare pistol, her movements fast and sure. "Stay down!" he shouted. "No!" she hissed, firing back with perfect aim. One of the bounty hunters fell from his horse. The other fled, his curses fading into the distance. When the echoes died, Luke turned to her, his breath ragged. She was trembling but unhurt. "You could have been killed," he said. She looked at him calmly. "You could have too." Then she smiled faintly. "Now we're even." After that day they moved farther north, deeper into Apache territory where white men rarely rode. Luke taught her how to shoot, how to mend leather, and how to read simple words from his weathered Bible. In return, she taught him to listen, to wind, to silence, to the earth itself. He began to understand the language she spoke without speaking. One evening she placed her hand on his chest. "Your heart," she said, "is louder than your words." He laughed softly. "And yours could silence the world." Under the wide desert moon, two broken souls began to heal. By summer, the land had bloomed around them. The creek ran strong, corn sprouted from the dry ground, and the wild horses grazed nearby. Travelers passing through whispered of a mysterious ranch hidden in the red hills, tended by a quiet cowboy and a woman who spoke to the earth. Luke didn't care for rumors. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he felt peace. Every morning began with her laughter. Every night ended with her song. He'd stopped counting time by days. He counted it by moments when she smiled. Then, one fateful morning, a troop of cavalry appeared on the horizon, blue coats glinting beneath the sun. Luke's stomach dropped. Naya froze, her expression unreadable. "They're looking for me," she said quietly. "Or for both of us?" Luke's jaw clenched. "They'll have to go through me first." She touched his arm. "No more blood, please." The soldiers arrived, their leader dismounting, a stern man with tired eyes. "We're searching for a fugitive Apache woman," he said. Luke stepped forward. "You'll find none here." The officer studied them both, saw the defiance in Luke's stance, the calm in Naya's eyes, and chose to turn away. When the soldiers vanished over the ridge, Luke exhaled, dropping to his knees in the dirt. Naya knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his. "You risked everything," she whispered. He looked at her, tears stinging his eyes. "You were worth it." That night, the wind carried a softness across the land, as though the desert itself had exhaled relief. They lay beside the fire, her head resting against his shoulder, the stars spilling endlessly above them. "You once said you didn't belong anywhere," she murmured. He smiled. "Guess I do now." Her hand found his. "So do I." As years passed, the world around them changed. Towns grew, railroads cut through the wilderness, and the old ways began to fade. But in their hidden valley, time stood still. Luke built a wooden cross on the hill where the sun set, marking the day he'd first met her. They never married by paper or priest, only by promise. "The wind is our witness," she'd said. "The earth remembers." Together they raised a small herd, traded with passing riders, and became a whisper of legend among those who believed in love, stronger than hatred. One spring morning, Luke woke to find Naya standing by the creek, her hair streaked with silver. She was older now, her face lined with stories, but her spirit still fierce. "The flowers came early," she said softly. "Maybe they know something we don't." Luke joined her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "If they do, they can keep it. I've got all I need right here." She looked at him, her eyes shining like the first dawn he'd ever seen. "You were my freedom," she said. He smiled. "You were my redemption." When Naya passed years later, it was quiet, just wind through the canyons and the whisper of her name carried through the air. Luke buried her beneath the flowering tree she once planted, her favorite place in the valley. He carved her name into the wood by hand, his tears falling into the dust. "You said the earth listens," he whispered. "Then tell it I'll see you soon." For months he spoke to her every night, as if she still sat beside the fire, her laughter echoing between the canyon walls. The world had taken many things from him, but not her memory. One summer evening, long after he grew frail, Luke saddled his old horse one last time. He rode to the ridge where they first met, the same trail where she had once looked at him with defiant eyes. The sun dipped low, painting the land gold. He closed his eyes, hearing her voice in the wind. "You didn't buy me," she whispered. "You saved me." A single tear traced his cheek as he whispered back, "No, Naya, you saved me." His hand fell from the reins, and the horse stood still, watching as the last light faded across the valley. They say if you ride through the Arizona hills at dusk, you can still hear her song carried on the wind, soft and haunting. And sometimes, if the light is just right, you'll see two figures riding together beyond the horizon, a cowboy and an Apache woman, side by side, forever free beneath the endless western sky.